Good evening. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to thank Sue Morford and Nicole Sheffield for her very generous intro, and everyone at Chief Executive Women for the opportunity to speak tonight, and for showing a great willingness to cover all topics from quantum computing, which I will not be talking to, right through to cosmetics, which is where I do come in. 22 years ago, I opened a single cosmetics store on Toorak Road in Melbourne called Mecca. Having spent time in the beauty industry, I saw lots of things I wanted to change. My very lofty goal was to disrupt traditional beauty retail and its somewhat dictatorial approach. I wanted customers to be in control of their experience, not the sales lady behind the counter. You all know them. So they didn't just look great, but much more importantly, that they left feeling fabulous. And I believed education was the key, via brand-agnostic advice and the know-how of highly trained teams. A lot of very skeptical people, citing a long laundry list of reasons, told me it would never work. Happily, they were wrong. We now have 100 stores, 4,000 team members, and Mecca accounts for a quarter of the premium beauty market in Australia and New Zealand. Now, all of this makes for a solid entrepreneurial story that's hit a lot of the right notes along the way. I sold my house to fund the business at the outset. I found a bank manager who agreed to give me a loan secured against my husband's future salary. As you can imagine, that was not easy. I convinced the best emerging brands in the world to give me exclusive distribution rights for Australia and New Zealand, when I didn't even have one shop, let alone 100. In modern day parlance, you could say that I basically stalked them into acquiescing. And we prevailed in our very own David and Goliath battle when a dominant global player entered our market. We didn't just defend our turf, we grew our business five-fold in the 5 years since their arrival. There's nothing like a bit of healthy competition to bring out your inner alley cat. But the real reason I'm standing here tonight is because last October, EY, as Nicole mentioned, did indeed name me their Australian Entrepreneur of the Year, the first woman to get the gong in the programme's 18-year history. So, whilst it's worth celebrating the milestone, I think it's also important to ask, why on earth did it take so long for a woman to win that award? And let me tell you, it's not for EY's lack of trying. Basically, it comes down to the numbers, as it always does. The odds are stacked against a woman winning, for the very simple reason that women are half as likely as men to own and run their own business. Even in America, with its huge market opportunities, only 2% of the women who do have businesses are likely to break the $1 million mark. Those owned by men are 3.5 times more likely to hit the magic million. How can that be? The obvious answer is that we don't just have a glass ceiling in the corporate world. We also have a less well-known, but just as impenetrable door into the entrepreneurial world. Why does this matter? Even if you look at it purely in economic terms, a BCG report found that having as many female entrepreneurs as male would generate between $75 and $130 billion for the Australian economy. That's a lot of money, whichever way you look at it. So finding an answer to unlocking the glass door isn't just about leveling the playing field. Three reasons often get cited for this glass door. The first being the age-old one that we heard Sue talking about, the one that's most difficult to address and which impacts the other two. Our culture, our unconscious or ingrained biases. The second is access to capital, and the third is a lack of meaningful networks. So let's start with the big one, ingrained bias. Why is it so challenging to change? Because it starts with the messaging children receive from the earliest age. You only have to look to the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, who basically concedes his sisters could have been as successful as him if the messaging was different. My sisters are fully as smart as I am, he said. They got better personalities than I had, but they got the message a million different ways that their future was limited. And I got the message that the sky is the limit, and it wasn't due to a lack of love or anything of the sort. It was the culture. Now, if I think about my childhood and the million messages I received, what was it about them that made me comfortable taking the less traveled road of an entrepreneur? Because there really isn't anything inherently extraordinary about me. I wasn't first in my class, I wasn't making lotions and potions at age 5, didn't sail around the world, didn't climb Mount Everest. To be honest, I think I may have hit my high in the under-14s long jump. The difference was that I grew up surrounded by entrepreneurial women. One grandmother owned a sweet shop, the other bought and ran a pub, whilst her husband was the headmaster of the local village school in Ireland, which was so not the done thing in those days, as you can imagine. My mother had an interior design company, and I made sure that my first boss was a woman, because when I met her, I knew that I wanted to hitch my wagon to hers and learn from her. So I actually got the consistent message that there was nothing unusual about women running a business, large or small. I'm proof that role models provide powerful, if silent, messengers. Interestingly, this year, EY pitched an argument that finally convinced me to become involved in the program, that a woman recipient would be a great example to other female entrepreneurs in the making. This really resonated with me because it's true. You cannot be what you cannot see. My parents also gave me the message that the sky was the limit for me and for my brothers. I was treated exactly the same as them. They can't cook, I can't cook. I went to boarding school, they then went to boarding school. They had to read all the torn-out articles from The Economist and listen to what seemed at the time to be interminable excerpts of books like Dreadnought, courtesy of my dad, thanks, and I did too. So whilst it sometimes felt like it had downsides at the time, the result was I saw myself as completely equal to them. Well, maybe just a little bit better, as any wonderfully annoying sister would. Now is probably the time to concede that my upbringing was slightly unusual, and slightly being the operative word. I went to boarding school at 7, to be fair, because I insisted, only to find out that it really wasn't like an Eden Blight novel at all. An early lesson in doing your research. I was yanked out at 14 and swept up in my parents' middle-aged adventure as they decided Australia was indeed the land of plenty and the perfect launch pad for children to have their own life adventure, whether we wanted to or not. So, out of London, we landed in far north Queensland with bulging suitcases, and then riffed on the pommy version of a travelling circus, driving around Australia for 6 months before settling right over there in Perth. It was as topsy-turvy as it sounds, but it gave me the message that change is okay, it's more than okay, and that it can be exciting and exhilarating. My parents also prized education above all else, and I consider it a gift that they imposed the same expectations on me as they did on my brothers of thriving at school, university, and postgraduate studies. I grew up knowing that they believed I could learn and problem solve my way into, and probably more importantly, out of anything, including a business and the challenges that come with that, just as well as anyone else could. I also received a rather more direct message from my parents over dinner, 4 years into my one and only corporate job, when they casually remarked that my personality seemed to be disimproving as my career seemed to be taking off. That was a light bulb moment for me. I decided I didn't have to work in a culture I didn't want to be a part of. So I quit to build something that I did want to be a part of. These messages, these collective messages, helped me face up to experiences that could otherwise have derailed me on my Mecca journey before I'd even started. There was the school careers counsellor who smiled tightly and remarked that, less than 1% of women earn over $100,000, you know, in reply to my stated career ambition of having my own company and earning at least that each year. And then there were the 3 of the 4 bankers I gave my business plan to who didn't even bother to read it before declining to fund Mecca. These messages also have helped shape the way I've dealt with some of the real doozies since Mecca's inception. Since you don't want to be here till midnight, I've kept it at 2. From watching more than 50% of our sales disappear overnight when we were only 1 year old, as George's, the specialty store in Melbourne, suddenly shuttered shop. To me, crashing to the ground, very loudly, 90 seconds into a 30-minute speech in front of 30 cosmetic company CEOs, and flashing my entire global peer group on the way down. Yes, really, and hence why I've opted for a long dress tonight, just in case lightning strikes twice. Changing the messaging is critical. Girls don't need to be mollycoddles. Girls thrive when given challenges and independence. I'm living proof that high expectations, change, some tough love, and regular late school pickups won't ruin your children. Which leaves me with the 2 other challenges female entrepreneurs face in getting through that glass door: access to capital and meaningful networks. Last year, $1 billion was invested into Australian and New Zealand startups. Of that, just $30 million went to all-female teams across 5 poultry deals. Flip side, $630 million went to all-male teams. I'm here to tell you it is really hard to create a thriving business without seed funding or growth funding. And if these numbers don't deliver the message of a door slamming in your face, then I don't know what does. And it's the reason that I have to give a shout out to Scale, an investment fund that finances and mentors female-led startups, which was founded with the express goal of changing these stats. And incidentally, 2 of these 3 founders belong to CEW, Carol Schwartz and Annette Kimmett. They're building a fund at the moment, if anyone's interested. Scale, to say it again. As with CEW, I see the benefit Scale brings by providing a building block of meaningful networks as well as finance. So, whilst it's easy to stand here and talk about the existence of a glass door and a glass ceiling, the pressing question is, what can each of us do to shatter it? Or more importantly, Given one of Mecca's 5 values is take responsibility, what am I doing to create change? On a grand scale, not that much. I can't stand here and talk about how I'm making sweeping policy changes or how I'm implementing change in a workforce of 50,000, although I'm very happy in the knowledge that there are those of you in the audience who can and who are. Rather, I can focus on my area of influence, Mecca, which I always saw as a platform to educate, elevate, and empower women, our customers, and even more importantly, our team. From the very beginning, Mecca has been a place to demonstrate to other women what my grandmothers and mother showed me, that we can be assertive, ambitious, driven to an outcome, whilst at the same time building a supportive, collaborative environment with a bit of fun thrown in for good measure. And with women making up 95% of our workforce, from the leadership team right through, we are showing that the result can be a successful, thriving business. Education is at the core of everything we do. I believe it's the unlocker of all potential. As a result, we inject 2% of our turnover to internal education programs, even including financial literacy workshops, so everyone can feel confident in managing their finances. We also bang on about the importance of superannuation all the time. And we now contribute super for all maternity leave. Why? Because the fastest growing group of homeless are single women over 65 years old. And as we all know, that's because the super program wasn't devised with women in mind in the first place. Something else we do that I hope might go some small way to changing the stats that CEW came out with last week, and which Sue was talking to, that more than half of ASX 200 companies have no women in ELT roles, is that we promote from within with a 90% internal promotion rate, encouraging women to bloody well lean in and take that next role. I want Mecca to develop the next generation of female business managers and entrepreneurs who can either stay with us or go forth and kickstart the process with a whole new cohort of women. Externally, we've created Mecca Empower and set a 2025 goal of ensuring 10,000 girls complete their secondary education who otherwise wouldn't, and helping 100 future female leaders on their journeys. And why is education so important? Because the evidence shows it works, is one of the most powerful levers there is to correct gender inequality. Just imagine the difference if we, as a society, educated the 131 million girls around the world who don't get to go to school. We've devised our program with the help and advice of the Australian Women Donors Network, who do an incredible job of advocating for greater investment in women and girls philanthropically, by individuals, but also by companies. Now, finding the time to do any of this is a massive challenge, and I should fess up that really, for the past 22 years, I've been obsessively focused on business and family to the exclusion of pretty much all else. I love doing Mecca, and I love being a mum to 2 teenage kids most of the time. But life is not some panacea of cosmetics, launch parties, and traveling around the world to scout out the latest brands. It's just as much about school lunches, forgotten sports bags, and hyperventilating as I run late for parent-teacher nights. The juggle that we all do, that we all mentally torture ourselves about, feels very real to me. And that's why I've relied so heavily on others to help grow the business and build Empower. I would not have the great privilege of standing here tonight to share Mecca's story without a long list of extraordinary contributors, starting with Mecca's incredible team, business mentors, advisors, peers, family, and so the list goes on. And I want to emphasize that this list is made up of women and men in equal measure, because we need men to be both support and participate in the long march, currently 108 years, to gender equality. Now, it's not lost on me that EY, frustrated by the lack of women self-nominating to its program and fed up with my 15 years of stonewalling, finally went to my husband, Pete, to lobby him to lobby me to get involved. Which he did. And then Pete, who joined Mecca 9 years in and is our co-CEO, couldn't have been more thrilled with the result. He's been such a linchpin in my success because he's never expected anything less of me than he has of himself on the work front, and he has never expected any more of me than he has of himself on the home front. He is the definition of a true champion of change in every way, including offering himself up as an indentured slave to the bank to secure that loan right back at the start. So, my luck is not just being born into a family that valued education and adventure in equal measure, or being in the right place at the right time to launch Mecca. My luck was being imbued with the confidence to recognize an opportunity and seize it, and then being surrounded by people, men and women, whose unconditional support has enabled me to succeed against the odds in building a business. Now, I know I'm preaching to the converted in this room, and that all of you are already doing all you can to make sure our ceiling is the next generation's floor. I believe together we can also open that glass door to aspiring female entrepreneurs. Each one of us in this room can change the messaging, be her network, take the time to read her business plan, invest in her ideas for disruption, and support her to feel empowered to succeed and fulfill her potential. Because it is by these small acts that we will continue to move the dial on gender equality here in Australia and across the globe. Thank you very much.